He just cut out.
Yeah.
Oh yeah? Yeah, Supervisor said you weren't coming.
Osio, welcome to the Red Road East. I'm your host, Fierce Truth Seeker. Today, we have a very, very interesting and entertaining show. And this particular show is going to be very dear and personal to me because our guest is going to be representing for the Caribbean Aboriginal peoples, okay, which is my maternal peoples. So today, I have the pleasure to be joined with Bobby Gonzalez.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here on your show. It's been a couple years, but I'm here.
Yep. And I've been trying to get you on because when I was an intern here, I used to work on the shows that you were on, and we spoke about, getting you, on my show once I get it started, and we're here now.
Okay, so where do we start?
Okay, so I guess you can, for those who don't know, tell us a little bit about yourself, your family history, brief bio.
Well, I've lived all of my life in the Bronx. That's why I have this peculiar accent. My people come from the island of Puerto Rico, but the Aboriginal name is Borinquen, which means land of valiant people. And it's the homeland of the Taino. The Taino were the people who discovered Columbus. It was quite an encounter back in 1492. We knew we were in trouble when they asked us why we took baths every day. We had a whole different culture from them. For example, my Taino ancestors never hit their children, which I'm glad my parents carried on that tradition. And I traveled across the country giving talks, lectures, poetry readings, storytelling shows about the Taino and the native people of the Western Hemisphere. Because native people are not just here in the United States or in Canada, they're Central and South America and the Caribbean.
Exactly. That's right. And how long have you been active in the community?
I've been active in the community at least 30 years. It all began when I started volunteering at the Inwood Park Powwow in Manhattan back in the 1980s. In fact, I was the individual chosen to ask the local community board to change the name of part of the park to Shirakapuck, the Lenape name of that area. And it took a couple of community board meetings, but finally they agreed and they changed the name to Shirakapuck. We have to always remember that the Bronx, Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens, and Staten Island is Lenape territory. So whenever I travel, before I begin a presentation, I always make it a point to acknowledge the original inhabitants of the land on which I stand.
Definitely. Let's see. So, what motivated you to start walking the Red Road?
Well, one reason why I was motivated to go on this Red Road there's so much misinformation out there about my people. And very often people are telling me, but aren't you extinct? There's no more of you? And I said, oh boy, here we go again. And I'll be very patient. I said, no, we're still very much alive. We're very much here.
That was my next question too.
In fact, the majority of powwows in the tri-state area are now being run by Taino. And people tell me, how do you pronounce that? Tiano? And I said, no, Taino, okay, which means the good people. And you're going to ask me about, what was the question about why people say we're no longer here and how I respond to that?
What do you say exactly? Yeah.
Well, I told them, you are now talking to the 2018 New York City Indian of the Year. Hello, and I'm a Taino. And who elected me as such? The Thunderbird Dancers, who are mostly people from the north. They're Hopi, Ho-Chunk, Apache, and they appointed a brother from the south as the Indian of the Year. And that's quite an honor for me and my people and an acknowledgement.
Exactly.
By the way, when you go to Latin America, don't ever call anyone Indio. That's like the N word up here for an African American. Either address them as being indigenous or by the name of their particular people. But don't say the I word.
Exactly. Yeah. Why is it important for us to acknowledge the indigenous identity?
It's important for us, it's important for non-native people. For me, it's so vital to maintain that contact between me and my ancestors. I once spoke with an Onondaga sister from upstate New York, and she told me a story that her brother went to a sweat lodge. And her brother was visited by spirits of his ancestors. And he began to cry to them and apologize, saying, I'm sorry, I can't speak the language. I no longer look like you because of historical reasons. And they told him in ceremony, it's okay. You're acknowledging us, you remember us, and for that we are very grateful. And it's very important for indigenous people to remember who they are and where their people came from. And that's true for all people, be they African, be they indigenous from this continent or other continents as well. Because I was very fortunate. My parents taught me that from a young age, and that created a firm foundation for the rest of my life. Because that was very self-affirming. I knew who I was, and I had no fear of going forward.
Wow. Yeah. Great. Let's see. What else? Your book. You didn't bring a copy of your book, right?
Of course.
Okay.
All right. Someone once said who's a poet, he says, half poet will travel. Always walking around with my book. I have several books out, but the book I brought with me is called The Last Puerto Rican Indian, a collection of dangerous poetry. And people ask me, why do you call it a collection of dangerous poetry? And I say, well, the poems confront misconceptions and stereotypes about Native people. For example, sometimes people ask me, how could you be Native? Your name is Gonzalez. And I answer back, well, more than 90% of the Native peoples of the Western Hemisphere live in so-called Latin America and Central and South America and the Caribbean. So for example, in Mexico, they speak more than 50 languages, one of which happens to be Spanish, and the rest are indigenous. We look to the Caribbean. You have the Kalinago, once known as the Carib, you have the Taino, and we're finding out through historical and archaeological studies that there wasn't one people called the Taino who lived in the Greater Antilles, in Puerto Rico, the Republic, Cuba, the Bahamas, the Lucayo. There were several people there. The Siguayo, the Macori, the Siboney. So it was a very complex civilization, even back then. And by the way, I was reading recently where the Spaniards said that the most highly sophisticated Tainos came from Haiti. And I said, okay, that's deep. You know, they have a rich history, both indigenous and African American they had some very smart generals who defeated Napoleon,
Yes.
who was considered the greatest general of all time. So, and they have a rich Aboriginal, Indigenous, and African history. By the way, sometimes people ask me, well, are you denying your African heritage? I said, no, quite to the contrary. I'm Taino, I'm Native, but I have African ancestry as well. And I embrace that. And by the way, I didn't want you to know, Africans came in before Columbus.
Right.
Okay. My personal research indicates that mainstream historians will be reluctant to admit that for two reasons. Number one, they would hate to admit that Africans arrived here, before white people, and they would be reluctant to admit that possibly Muslims arrived here before Christians.
Right.
So it will be alternative histories that will point that out about the African presence here. And we won't go to Atlantis. I've heard stories from Native people from Central America about a submerged continent, but that requires more research. And then there's this theory called the Bering Straits theory, that Native people came over across Asia. And if you want to get a Native angry, tell him or her, you know you came across the Bering Straits from Asia. Even up in Alaska, I've told people this theory, and they say, oh yeah, we call it the BS theory. So we came from here.
I like that, the BS thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that.
All right, yeah. Well, I heard that from an Inuit brother up in Alaska, so they don't believe it either. There was, in 1994, there was a conference in Colorado of Native elders from North and South, and the consensus was that we originated in Central America and then moved up north and south, but the land where we originated from is now underwater. Remember that the oceans used to be a lot lower, and there are land masses there that are now submerged. There's a lot of history there.
Yeah.
When I talk about the Kalinago, the Cara, people say, well, those are the cannibals, right? I said, no. That's what we call in the Bronx a Christmas story. They were not cannibals.
Right, exactly.
That was used as a legal pretext by the Spaniards in order to enslave them. All right? And another stereotype is that the Taino believed the Spaniards were gods. Well, let me tell you something. Columbus came on 3 ships, the Niña Pinta and the Santa Maria. The Santa Maria sank. He had to return in 2 ships. He left behind 39 men. When he returned on the second voyage, all 39 men had been killed by the Taino. So we knew right from the get-go, they were not gods. All right? It's all the explorers, the colonizers, when they went up and down the Western Hemisphere, they said, oh, they believed that we were gods. Nah. We knew from the beginning they were just as human as we were. And they could be killed, they could die from disease, they were just as human as we were. People ask me sometimes, what's the difference between Arawak and Taino? And I say, same difference. In the Spanish-speaking islands, they call us Taino. And in the English-speaking and French-speaking islands, they call us by different variations of the word Arawak. But it's the exact same people.
Right, exactly.
And some of us used to go up to Florida back in the old days before the colonizers arrived. And some of us mixed with the Calusa people who lived up in Florida, you know. And we had a ball game in the Caribbean called the Bate. And the Europeans had never seen rubber. The astounding thing is, there is no rubber in the Caribbean. So where do we get the rubber from? It had to be from Mexico.
Yep.
You know, so we did a lot of traveling in those days.
Mexico, the rubber country. Yeah.
Yeah, probably among the Olmecs. Here on the campus of Lehman College, you have a large replica of an Olmec statue. Which is another evidence of African presence here with the features. So we'll never know.
Yeah. Yes, a very deep history.
So I want to share with you one of my poems.
Oh, nice.
And
I was just about to ask.
well, some of our chiefs were men, but many of our leaders were also women. And one woman came from Haiti. Aite, which means high rocky country. Her name was Anacaona. And she reigned there in the early 1500s, and she tried to appease the Spaniards, but it didn't work out. And they hanged her. So I wrote this poem in her honor.
Okay.
She sits on the earthen floor, her wrists and ankles fettered by iron chains. She sits motionless, absolutely still with her eyes shut tight as the breath comes and goes in long and measured flows. She is the poet queen of Haiti, and now she squats alone in a hut, chained in darkness, with only the damp floor of Mother Earth to comfort her. She begins to release tears that fall to the ground like offerings to the great bleeding mother, La Madre Tierra Itibacao Baba. She cries tears of sorrow for a daughter who will not have a mother to teach and to love her. She cries tears of sorrow for the children who now have to endure a life of cruel enslavement. And she cries tears of anguish for the earth of her island that will no longer be tenderly cared for by the only people who are sensitive to her ways and to her needs. And then she begins to hum. And then she begins to chant. She chants the poem song that had been sung on the morning that she was born. She chants the poem song that had been sung on the day she became a woman and was given a new name. And she chants the poem song that had been sung on the day when she felt the labor pains that seemed to tear her body apart. And then she begins to sing and cry with joy, knowing that she will soon be walking in the radiant spirit land where the ancient ones dwell. But for now, she sits alone on the earthen floor of a hut, her wrists and ankles fettered by iron chains. She waits to be hanged, and the moon and the sky turns blood red in anger as the poet queen squats on the earthen floor alone. Anacaona, Anacaona.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
And it's going to be a very busy summer for me. I'll be all over the place in New York City. If you want to find out where I'll be, you can go to either my Facebook page.
Well, before you say that,
Yes.
Save that for a second. I was going to ask you if you could do another poem.
Oh,
Do you
Since you insist.
That one? Do you have that one in the book? What's it called? Mr. Columbus, I think it's called.
I revived that a few times.
Oh, you revised it?
Yeah, but this is the original. Thank you, Mr. Columbus. Maybe we could call this "Thank you, Mr. Trump." Calm yourself. Thank you, Mr. Columbus. Thank you, all his colleagues and all of your descendants who carry on his mission. Thank you for blessing us with termination, relocation, subjugation, assimilation, acculturation, and detribalization. Thank you, Mr. Columbus, for blessing us with regulation, retaliation, reorganization, reclamation, taxation, and alienation. Thank you, Mr. Columbus, for blessing us with domination, decimation, resignation, confiscation, desecration, and elimination. Thank you, Mr. Columbus, for blessing us with castration, decapitation, sterilization, exploitation, and dehumanization. Thank you, Mr. Columbus, for blessing us with depopulation, humiliation, extermination, separation, indoctrination, discrimination, isolation, and violation. For these bounteous benedictions, we thank thee. May you and yours be one day be equally blessed. Thank you, Mr. Columbus.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. What inspired you to write that poem?
Well, Columbus Day. I was invited out to one year. It was Boise State University in Idaho, and they were having a Columbus Day event. They asked me to go out there and read, so I created this poem. But the interesting thing was they had security on campus when I read the poem and gave my lecture, because Idaho is a red state, very conservative. You had Native sisters and brothers there and Chicano sisters and brothers, and they were all for me, but you had the main body of the population who had different feelings about Columbus and see him as a hero. And you have this movement across the country to change the name of Columbus Day to Indigenous Day.
Right.
People say, isn't that great? And I repeat the words of the great Native American leader John Trudell, who was once the chairman of the American Indian Movement, AIM. He said, they may change the name, but they still treat us the same. So It's great. It changed the name, but let's see if they accord us the rights that we deserve.
True. Wow. Makes sense.
Well, actually, this is not the real cover. I can't take this off because this was made by a brother who was locked down. And he read the book, he loved it, and he created this cover. And he sent it to me. But now it's so part of the book, I can't remove it. So you can't see the actual cover of the book.
Okay.
But if you go online, Google, also you can go on Google Books. And you can read parts of them for free. You don't have to pay for it.
Okay. Wow. So you have the powwow coming up.
I have a lot of events coming up.
Okay.
So get your pens out, folks. All right. On June 1st, Saturday, June 1st coming up, there'll be a huge Indigenous festival. The address is 1029 East 163rd Street at the Southern Boulevard, Hunts Point Shopping District. There'll be a big stage there. We'll have Mexican natives there. We'll have Silver Cloud. A great day. It'll be free. I'll be performing on Governor's Island on Saturday, June 22nd. I'll be starting a series of open mics at Flushing Town Hall, Friday, July 8th.
Okay.
On July 9th, I'll be doing a series of spoken word classes at the Bronx Museum. The first powwow, the second one rather, will be at Pelham Bay Park on Sunday, September 29th. Also free. And we'll finish up with a powwow at Fordham University in the Bronx, Saturday, November 9th. And we'll have Silver Cloud singers there, we'll have the Thunderbird dancers, and we'll have great indigenous fruit from Mexico.
So you'll be doing poetry at the powwows as well.
Storytelling, poetry, and trilingual, English, Spanish, and Taino.
Nice. Wow. Oh man, yeah, definitely. I will surely be there.
Okay, we'll look forward to coming to as many of these events as you can. And like I said, if you missed the dates and the places, just go to my website, bobbygonzalez.com, and for future events, there's a page.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, I wish the show was longer.
I might have to come back again.
It would be my pleasure for sure.
I live right down the road.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, that's even better. Yeah.
So I want to thank you very much, and like the Cherokee would say, Doner da Goha'i.
Exactly. You got it. You got it. Okay. So we'll have you on very soon. And anytime that you want to come here to this particular show, you have a home.
Okay.
You have a home.
Well, there are several people trying to revive the Taino language. And it's going to take more than a lifetime, several generations to bring it back. But I wish there would be a research project on Taino Sign Language. I was speaking once with a brother from Puerto Rico. He lived way up in the mountains. And he began a conversation with me. He says, yeah, my friend died. He was good people. Right away, I started taking notes. He was good people. We had a strong friendship, but his woman dominated him. And I said, oh, wow, that's got to be Taino. But then recently, I attended a Native American conference out west. It was in Texas. And they said, before we begin the program, we have to follow Native American protocol. And they write down the list. And they said, most important of all, we can only point at each other Native American way, which was with the lips. I said, okay, Bobby, don't bust out laughing, but that's what we do in the South Bronx. And the pointing of the lips is very indigenous, something we carry on from the folks, and don't even think about it.
Wow, that's deep.
Yeah, and next time I come, I want to talk to you about how people were wiped out on paper.
Paper genocide.
Yeah, and I want to talk about how it happened in Virginia.
Walter
Okay.
Plecker. Yeah.
I can tell you some Walter Plecker stories. A friend of mine went to his office, By the way, for those in the audience who don't know, they passed a law in Virginia saying you're either white or colored. There's no more Native Americans. So this is like in the 1920s. So a friend of mine who was Chickahominy, her mother went to the office and said, look, my birth certificate, I'm Chickahominy. He took the paper and went like this. You're colored. And they've never recovered. A good example is the case of the Lovings.
Right, exactly.
And for many years, people say, oh, this white man married this black woman. But when the movie came out 2 years ago, the grandson had a press conference. He said, my mother wasn't black.
Exactly.
You know, she was Native, but because of that law, she was classified on paper as being African American, as being colored.
Yep. That's right.
All right?
That's right.
So you have all these people in Virginia who are Native but can't prove it because of this law passed by Dr. Walter Plecker.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, man. So I definitely can't wait to get you back on the show.
Okay, very soon.
Thanks a lot. Okay, folks. It's man. I wish we had another half an hour, you know, but there will be another time, and I'm gonna take us out with some music and some credits. And until the next time, do da da, gong hong.